Okay. We have 39 participants online. Welcome. And we have 85 people who register for this presentation on climate resilient PPP workshop under the ASEAN Maritime Transport Working Group. Very nice to meet you. My name is Hubert Jenny. I'm a disaster and risk and resilience and climate change advisor at the Partnership for Infrastructure. It's a program funded by the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. My experience is I spent about 18 years in the private sector and 20 years in development, including 15 years with Asian Development Bank and the last 2 years with the Green Climate Fund. And now I do consulting for UNICEF, World Bank, ADB, and Partnership for Infrastructure. So very nice to meet you. Welcome to all of you. We are recording this call. I hope that it's okay with everybody. So we want to record the presentation and post it later. Our program is quite packed. We have from 10:30 to lunch Bangkok time, opening and welcoming remark. Then we'll go through why we are doing this, why climate disaster resilient ports are important. I think most of you in this working group knows. We will introduce PPP process, and we'll go through the project cycle, which is project identification. Then we'll break out for lunch for 1 hour, and then we'll go through appraisal and structuring of PPP project, tender and contract award, as well as contract management. We will finish with a Q&A session and closing remark. We will basically have this Q&A session, but I will authorize question at the end of each session so that you can continue and have a good understanding. We don't want anybody to be left behind. So if you have pressing question, because there is a lot of people in the presentation, please wait the end of the session to ask your question. And you can always drop a question in the chat. My colleague Anita is monitoring the question, and we will address all those questions either at the end of one session, either at the end of the presentation in the Q&A. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Ajit Kairut, to the chairman of the ASEAN Maritime Working Group, to give us a welcoming remark. Ajit Kairut, over to you.
Thank you, sir. A very good morning to everyone. It's so nice to see that there's quite a lot of participants in this thing. So welcome to today's workshop on climate resilient port public-private partnership. I'd like to acknowledge representatives from the ASEAN Secretariat, the Australian Mission to the ASEAN, and other Australian Embassy colleagues from around the region. Australia is a key partner to the ASEAN Maritime Working Group on maritime connectivity and decarbonization. Welcome to our ASEAN Maritime Working Group members and participants who are joining us from the wider network of transport and marine departments. And indeed, we have representation from across relevant member states' ministries. Climate resilience and public-private partnership in cross-sector endeavor, and this diverse representation demonstrates the region's commitment to driving progress. Lastly, to our colleagues from the Partnership of Infrastructure P4I initiative, who will deliver today's workshop, and our long-term partners in maritime decarbonization. Decarbonization and green innovation are no longer optional. They are essential to future-proof of the maritime industry. ASEAN, as a global maritime hub, is particularly vulnerable to impacts of climate and disaster risks. And the ASEAN Maritime Transport Working Group, MTWG, is committed to driving our collective efforts to ensure our maritime infrastructure and assets are climate resilient. We already see increasing frequency and severity of climate-related stresses and disasters, which are causing substantial damage to the infrastructure, particularly maritime and port system. Our maritime systems are vital for ASEAN economies, and we need to ensure that they can withstand climate shocks. Damage to maritime systems has been cascading effects on society, causing delays in shipping, lost jobs and health impacts for workers, and lost revenue for shippers, shipping company, and governments who all invest in the function of the ports. Climate and disaster resilience means preparing our ports for sea level changes at ports and in the depth of shipping lanes, ensuring port infrastructure can withstand increasing heat and increasing the ability of ports and surrounding communities to withstand and quickly recover from storm surges, wind, and other impacts of tropical storms and cyclones. In this regard, we are happy to have been working with the Australian government through partnerships for infrastructure to deliver several studies to support our progress in resilient decarbonisation. Among them, the ASEAN Port Sector Public-Private Partnership, PPP, best practices today. In 2024, Australia, through Partnership of Infrastructure, worked with the ASEAN Secretariat to deliver the PPP study. Today's workshop takes us deeper into how we can build climate resilient port sector PPPs. As the next step in this work stream, we are here to gain a deeper understanding on how public-private partnership work and how they can support our transition. PPPs are a critical tool to mobilize private sector finance to bridge the infrastructure gap. And the urgent need for this partnership to embed climate resilience. I thank everyone on the call today for taking the time out of your busy schedule to delve deeper into the topic, particularly our colleagues from Indonesia, for whom today is a public holiday. Happy Indonesia Day. This is time well invested. I encourage active participation and open dialogue, reaffirming the shared commitment of ASEAN and our partners to build climate resilient maritime transport systems and sustainable, prosperous future for the region. I will now give the floor to Terry Kee O'Quinn, First Secretary of Infrastructure, Energy and Climate, Australian Embassy to ASEAN, to deliver the opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Haji Karul, for your welcoming remarks. For those of you I haven't met yet, Terry O'Quinn from the Australian Mission to ASEAN, and thank you very much for being here with us today. I would like to echo the Chair's welcome to the Maritime Transport Working Group members, Transport and Marine Department colleagues, and representatives from Member States' ministries, the ASEAN Secretariat, and colleagues joining us from Australian embassies and high commissions in the region. Australia is pleased to continue our ongoing collaboration with ASIC and ASEAN member states on maritime connectivity, resilience, and decarbonisation. As you know, the maritime sector is the backbone of ASEAN's economy. Around 80 to 90% of international trade moves by sea, and our region's ports and shipping lanes are vital arteries for global trade and prosperity. Today's workshop is the culmination of our longer-term collaboration with ASEAN. It aims to provide foundational knowledge and understanding to enable the integration of disaster risk reduction and climate resilience into port investment and operation, especially within public-private partnership frameworks. This is a deeper exploration of the ASEAN port sector PPP's best practice study, which can be a bit of a mouthful to say sometimes, which was developed together with the ASEAN Secretariat. And really, this is aiming to provide greater access to information about the current and recommended port PPP best practices regionally and globally, to facilitate knowledge sharing among ASEAN member states and Australian agencies, to share Australia's experience with implementation, and also to improve awareness of ways to enhance disaster and climate resilience through port sector PPPs. As Hubert described in the beginning, in terms of logistics, the workshop will be conducted in two parts. So the morning session will introduce key considerations for climate and disaster resilient ports and PPPs. We'll break for lunch for 1 hour, and then return in the afternoon to consider developing PPP projects, procurement, and contracting. So the sessions are designed to be very practical guides covering active management of climate risks in port PPPs, navigating internal socialization and buy-in, and guidance on assessing climate finance for port projects. We really do welcome your participation during the sessions, and please do share your questions via the chat, and the team will endeavor to address all of these during the presentation. Now, most importantly, I would like to introduce our Partnerships for Infrastructure team who are delivering the workshop today. We have Hubert Jenny and Jenna Jaden, who are P4I's Disaster Risk Reduction and Climate Change Advisors. We also have joining us Trishna Rana, who's P4I's Gender, Equality, Disability, and Social Inclusion Advisor, as well as Anita Dullard, our P4I Country Engagement Manager for Malaysia and ASEAN. I'll now hand over to Hubert to kick off the session, and I wish you all a great workshop. And as the chair mentioned, thank you to those of you in Indonesia who are joining us today. Happy Indonesia Day. And let me pass over to Hubert. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Terry, and thank you very much, IG Karut. I didn't know it was Indonesia Day, so happy Indonesia Day to all the Indonesian friends. So we're going to start first with a pre-training survey that will be managed by my colleague Anita. And that's basically to assess a little bit your level of understanding of PPP so that we can adapt the presentation to your understanding of PPP. So if everybody has a very good knowledge of PPP, we will basically go very fast through the basic. If I find out that there is about 1/3, 40% of the audience that doesn't have a good understanding of PPP, we will spend a bit more time on the basic. So over to you, Anita. You have the Mentimeter online. You can scan and you can start the poll. Over to you, Anita.
So, colleagues, if you could scan the QR code here, that would be fantastic. That'll take you to the Mentimeter. Otherwise, you could type in the website, which I'll drop into the chat as well in one moment. But I'm just going to take over the sharing of screen. Here. And so hopefully you will have received, you will have entered into the Mentimeter. Please don't hesitate to jump into the comments if you're having difficulty. And I can see already that we have people here from Indonesia. Welcome. Some joining from also directly from Jakarta, some colleagues from MPA, I imagine from Singapore, 10 colleagues from Malaysia, so that's fantastic, and colleagues joining from multiple locations in the Philippines, Vietnam, Hanoi, thank you for joining today. We have colleagues from a couple of locations in Thailand, in Cambodia. So that's fantastic to see everybody here on the call. I am just going to switch over to our next question, and that is to get a sense of how much you know about the impacts of climate change on ports and maritime infrastructure. So fantastic. Thanks to those who are already responding. And we've got a bit of a mixed bag. So good to see that we do have some people on the call who do have quite a bit of knowledge, it seems. We'll also be keen to hear from you in comments, suggestions and work underway. So we know a little bit, most of us know a little bit. Some are starting from scratch and some have done considerable work. So that's good to hear. Okay, we'll move into the next slide. So this slide is about, how we can improve our ability to build resilience for our ports and maritime infrastructure. A bit of a similar outcome there, very similar in fact, and that makes sense. Okay, so that's interesting. Perhaps a little bit more on the little. The next question is around how much know PPPs.
Anita, you are on mute.
Thank you. Just wanted to get a sense, as you can see in the question, how much is known in the room around just an inclusive transition, and if you're building that into your resilience practices. Okay, so that's good. We're in a similar boat here, all sitting in the middle. We know a little bit, but we're all keen to know a bit more. So that's great. Thank you very much for giving us this kind of initial overview. I'm going to hand it back over to Hubert now to continue and get into some of the explanation.
Thank you, Anita, and thanks for the participant to respond. So my colleague Jenna will start with the presentation on what makes port disaster and climate resilient. And as I mentioned, please either put your question into the chat, we will monitor the chat, or wait the end of session 1 in order to ask your question online. We will keep 5 minutes for question, and then we have the Q&A session at the end. Jenna, over to you. I will run the slide as you wish.
Great, thanks Hubert, and welcome and good morning everyone. Thanks for making it here. It's nice to see there's 66 people in the presentation. Okay, so we will start with an introduction on why making ports disaster and climate resilient is important. Next slide. Sorry, who has control of the slides? Do I have control of the slides? Anita?
I control the slide. Give me a minute.
Okay. Go ahead to the next one whenever.
Okay. You should be on the next one.
Thanks. Okay. So there are several frames from which to view the application of disaster and climate resilience to infrastructure projects, and we've kind of roughly pulled out these 4 frames here. All are equally important, and application of the tools and principles under them will increase the positive impact and resilience of an infrastructure project. Excuse me, I have a bit of a cold today. But first, what is resilience? So resilience is the ability to withstand or recover quickly from shocks. So this can mean rapid shocks, like during a typhoon, where strong wind and flooding might inundate a region and cause stress on quake rains, or might mean gradual stress, like increasing heat over many years, that would put increasing stress on an energy distribution system. So both of those are shocks, rapid and long-term onset. Resilience needs to be built in not just to climate impacts, but also for other likely shocks as well, including things like earthquakes, tsunamis, and even where appropriate, potential impacts from society, like population growth or civil unrest or crime. So to the frames that we want to use to assess the necessary resilience features to be built into a project, these first include climate change mitigation, which refers to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change, which requires that an infrastructure project design team appraise emissions that will result from the building, the project design, the operations, and then the decommissioning of the project, and then target emissions reductions and efficiencies. A second frame in which you want to look at climate resilience and disaster risk reduction is climate change adaptation, which refers to the ability to adapt to the impacts of climate change. In order to make sure a project would do this, a project design team must do a climate risk assessment to understand risks to the system. These will include, for example, if a project is built in a place that's predicted to have increasing heat waves, you would need measures to protect, for example, warehouses and the goods in them from the damaging heat. This could also include design of non-physical assets to improve resilience, such as alternate work or travel modes if staff cannot get into work because of brownouts or other effects of heat or power. A third frame to look at this is disaster risk reduction. This can be about climate or non-climate disasters, but once again is something a project design team must understand and build into the system. So for example, if new port facilities are being built in a zone where earthquakes are common, this must be accounted for. Or if port facilities were built in a place at an increased risk of disastrous floods due to sea level rise, port facilities must be raised or otherwise protected from likely flood disasters. And then finally, we want to look at resilience in the frame of a just transition. This refers to shifting, just transition refers to shifting to a climate-friendly economy in a way that gives equitable access to all and does not incur costs or have barriers that would prevent many from taking part in new economic activities. In terms of port, this could include integrating this could include integrating local communities and port workers into the design process and making sure to align the project with national development goals. Next slide. So studies have shown that investing in climate resilient transport is critical to economies and to societies. I'll just read what's on the slide here. You can read it yourself. But studies have shown that over 2/3 of global infrastructure use losses are caused by unreliable transportation infrastructure, accounting for losses of $107 billion US, or about 0.4% of a sample of GDP. Low and income countries, that has been calculated, need to spend between 0.5% and 3.3% of their GDP annually on new transport infrastructure by 2030. However, despite all these investments, the net benefit on average of investing more in resilient infrastructure in low and middle income countries would be 4.2 trillion with $4 return on investment for every $1 invested. So it is a good return on investment and it pays to invest in climate resilient infrastructure. Next slide, please. So this slide goes through many of the different climate hazards that port infrastructure and maritime infrastructure in general might experience, and that you need to think about when developing a new maritime infrastructure project. So as it notes along the top in red, some of the things that are most likely to affect ports would include sea level rise, storm surges, saltwater intrusion, winds, rains, electrical storms, river flooding, extreme temperatures, sedimentation, which is a big deal here in the Mekong region, drought, reduced river flows, and coastal erosion. And then along the bottom, you can see it gives examples of what these impacts might be. So for example, you could have direct impacts on infrastructure that could destroy it or deteriorate it. Some of these events or hazards could impact access to a port that could result then in higher costs and disruption of shipping lanes and disruption of distribution of goods, including food. This could also impact port operations. The actual physical environment around the port could be altered by climate-related events, which could then further impact the port infrastructure or the access or the operations. As a result of climate hazards or disasters, some of the socioeconomic impacts might include displacement of local populations or disruptions of livelihoods, which could directly impact the staff that work in a port or in maritime infrastructure, or could indirectly impact them because it's impacting their communities, the place they live in, the place where their children go to school. The natural habitat can also be affected, which could won't directly in many cases impact the port infrastructure itself, but will have secondary impacts on the quality of life, the quality of the environment in the community, as well as secondary and tertiary impacts on overall national and regional environmental goals. And then, of course, a lot of these are multiplicative and they build upon each other and then impact further aspects of ports, such as shipping lanes, movement of goods, ability to dock, and things like that. Next slide, please. So this was a study that looked at, done last year in 2023, that looked at climate risks on maritime ports across the globe. And they found that 86% of all ports studied are likely to be impacted by more than 3 types of natural hazards each year, while 50% could be exposed to 4 or 5. You can see by the colors what some of the biggest impacts are. You can see that there's a lot of dark red dots, so a lot of ports are expected to be impacted by cyclones. And then fluvial is a category, which I believe in this case refers to sea level rise or river impacts. And so yes, there's going to be a big impact on ports because of climate change. Next slide. So for an example, here's Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina, which was the Category 5 storm that made landfall in Louisiana on the southern U.S. coast in 2005, forced the U.S. ports of New Orleans, Mobile, and South Louisiana to close up for 4 months. Nearly 1,400 people lost their lives, and many families faced long-term challenges. This in total, post-disaster estimates suggested that excuse me, about $2.2 billion in damages were affected the Louisiana ports, and this resulted in an estimated $882 million of losses of agricultural trade, as just one example. So really, really huge economic impacts for ports that are not prepared for disasters and climate change. Next slide, please. Again, to emphasize how climate risks can have severe economic impacts on ports. The total climate risk to ports is thought to be worth $7.6 billion each year globally. The risk of annual damages can range between $10 million to above $50 million per port. And then the port closures and reconstruction following natural hazards puts $67 billion of trade at risk every year. And this again is from a multi-hazard study done in 2023 on port infrastructure. Next slide, please. I'll turn it over for a bit to my colleague Trishna, who is our Gender Equity and Inclusion Advisor at P4I.
Thank you, Jenna, and good morning, everyone. My name is Trishna Rana, and I'm the GEDC Advisor, Gender Equality, Disability, and Social Inclusion Advisor at P4I. And Jenna has already touched on a lot of the issues that the social economic issues that come with the decarbonization of ports. I will expand on it a bit more in the next 10 minutes or so. We will look at how gender equality and inclusion can be integrated into issues such as maritime workforce planning, skills development, as well as policy developments or policy frameworks. And just to note that an equitable and just transition is not just a moral imperative, but it also brings with it financial benefits. It's a driver for innovation, as well as it provides opportunities for regional cooperation as well. I know as experts working in the sector of maritime, we've all heard just and equitable transition. But what does it actually mean? It means that when we're shifting to a sustainable net zero future, it needs to be designed and implemented in a way that's fair and inclusive. And what that means is everyone in a community, whether they're workers in a port, whether they're social groups that are being impacted, that live near or close by to the ports, are brought along in the journey to a low carbon economy, which could mean creating new jobs or upskilling people who are already a part of that economy and making sure that no one is left behind. In terms of some of the benefits, for example, the ASEAN Center for Energy, the key document that ACE has towards a just energy transition, it has estimated that about 300 billion in green economy revenues is that the ASEAN region will have about 300 billion in green economy revenues by 2030. So that's quite a large amount of revenue, and 5.8 million, almost 6 million jobs are going to be created in the renewable and green industry. What that also means is we need to make sure people who have not had access to these jobs prior need to be bought into that economy, so they're also they're getting the benefits from it. In terms of just the ASEAN context itself and what are some of the policy landscapes here, as you all know, and as I just mentioned, there's that key document that ACE has produced. There's also the 42nd ASEAN Ministries on Energy meeting that concluded with a milestone inclusion of a stronger commitment to just and inclusive renewable energy cooperation in the region, as well as there's a CEO-led community of companies called ASEAN Leaders for Just Energy Transition, so ASEAN JET, from across the region and different sectors, and that's facilitated by the World Economic Forum. So this is just to highlight that these conversations are already taking place at the ASEAN level. Next slide, please, Hubert. Thank you. So in the next few slides, I'll briefly touch upon some of the risks of maritime decarbonization without that just transition angle. And there are quite a few economic and social risks, and I want to touch upon both of them. Like Jenna has already mentioned, like I mentioned in the beginning slide as well, I think one of the key issues here is job losses in traditional maritime sectors. So for example, in diesel shipping or manual port labor. So we need to be aware of how that impacts different communities. There's also an issue in terms of economic risks of how the older labor force might have a skills mismatch to the newer technologies that are required. So how do countries, how do companies reskill their labor force? There's also decreased productivity due to workforce disruption and uncertainty. On the social risk side, there's the risk of marginalization of women, youth, particularly indigenous or ethnic minority communities who might be living around port areas, and their informal work life might get disrupted. There's also the risk of widening income equality between skilled and unskilled workers as well. In terms of more upstream local risks, there are risks of displacement, especially if the land use is being expanded in areas as well. In terms of financial risks, if a just transition lens is not taken, then there's a financial risk that there might be loss to access of climate finance, and we'll talk a bit more about it throughout this morning's session, as well as reduced foreign direct investment in maritime infrastructure as well. So these are just some key risks that I wanted to highlight. In terms of a few examples, actually, I wanted to provide a few examples within actually the Southeast Asia region of what is already being done to mitigate some of these risks and bring out the opportunities of a just transition within the maritime sector. So one is from Malaysia, the Port of Tanjung Pelapas, which won a Forward Faster Sustainability Award for Gender Equality in 2023. And the way they did this was they set a quota for women's employment within the maritime sector. And the Port of Tanjung Pelapas actually has 8% of women in their workforce, which is much higher than global averages of 1 to 3%. So encouraging more women to work within the maritime sector has really improved their performance as well, and as a result, they won that sustainability award. In terms of community displacement and community engagement, an example is from the Port of Singapore as well, where the Port of Singapore has provided alternative housing options for displaced community members. It has also come up with resettlement programs to provide financial compensation for communities that have been displaced as well. And it does a really good job of long-term engagement with communities so that there's a continuous feedback from people who have been impacted, and that they are also people who've been impacted can also share in some of the benefits. I will end here, but happy to take any questions later on when we open for Q&A. Thanks, Jenna. Back to you.
I think you can go back here, go to slide 17. Yeah, the one in
There
front
you
of
are.
there's one with a group of women, and then the one after that, whatever number that is in your version. Next one. Okay, great, thank you. So we are featuring here a couple of different case studies of climate resilient ports with demonstration of private sector participation potential. The first one that we'll briefly go over here is the port of Nader West Med in Morocco. So this project is a deep water port that demonstrates how adaptation considerations can be incorporated into the design, construction, and operations of port infrastructure. So this port is envisioned to be delivered through concessions contracts from the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. As covenants in the EBRD loan agreement, climate change adaptation measures need to be included in tender documents in both construction and operation phase. And there's a requirement for contractors to verify that aspects of the design are robust to expected changes in sea level. So what are some of the climate resilience measures that they are putting into place? Oh, sorry, and the EBRD is also doing technical assistance on the preparation of an emergency response plan for extreme weather events. So it's a $943 million project. And what are some of the climate resilience measures that are being put in because of the climatic expectations in Morocco? So they're going to be doing installation of surfacing, mechanical, and electrical equipment designed to withstand projected temperature extremes, which would be in excess of 40 degrees Celsius. In practical terms, that means they might be using things like reflective pavement that also has holes in it to increase permeability and improve water drainage. Some measures then like that will have added benefits of reducing heat island effects and also allowing more water to return to the water table, helping to ensure that a dry location like Morocco does not run out of water for human use. They will also be installing storage facilities to withstand extreme temperatures and weather. Again, in practical terms, there are lots of doing this. Lots of ways of doing this, which could include building white or reflective structures, using actual greenery and plants as a way to reduce heat islands, and building in solar energy panels for cooling and reducing pressure draw from the electric grid during heat waves. They're doing, as I noted, an emergency response plan for extreme weather events. They're doing a coastal erosion monitoring scheme for the local area to provide early warning of potential climate-related impacts, as well as sea level rise. And they're doing a structured asset maintenance program. Next slide. So I think as we've already been touching on, the climate resilience of ports have multiple aspects. For one, there's the structure or physical resilience. This would include anything related to infrastructure, engineering, technologies, and then the ecosystems that surround them. There's social resilience, and this will be anything that improves the local communities and resilience of local communities and reduces their vulnerability to hazards. And then institutional resilience, which can include actions ranging from insurance arrangements and organizational changes to social policies and environmental regulations, such as the protection of marine areas that would have indirect or direct impacts on the ports. Next slide, please. So this is a very busy slide. It's more meant for you to look at probably after the talk. But basically what we've done here is we've divided up all kinds of different aspects of the port, the infrastructure itself, the access to it, the operations, the environment surrounding it, socioeconomic factors, the natural environment, and then a group of things called others. So how to start incorporating climate resilience into ports. This is the first of two slides that are similar. So one is to start compiling climate records, do climate monitoring and downscale climate change models to the local level. In many cases, of course, this is not going to be the responsibility of a port manager or a port design project team. These are things that are already should be done in every country, in all of your countries at the national level. And in many cases, they're downscaled to local levels as well. But when designing a port or improving the climate resilience of a port, it will be part of the responsibility of the people that are working on that project to begin collecting that data and using it, incorporating it into port design and operations. Same thing with hazard assessment. So this is beyond just what are the climate records, but what kinds of hazards have been impacting the infrastructure assets and the physical environment about the port, around the port. Have there been increasing typhoons? Has there been siltation blocking shipping lanes? Has there been sea level rise? Have there been severe heat waves that have been increasing? So this data, again, would be captured by governments, by weather monitoring services and climate monitoring services, both nationally and locally. And as you're improving the climate resilience of your port, it is the responsibility of the team that is doing this to start gathering that data and seeing how it would apply to the actual operations and maintenance of the port. Then the third step would be to start adjusting infrastructure design, operations, and maintenance activities in line with these possible hazards. So give some examples here, potential actions such as if flooding is a risk, you'd raise aprons and breakwaters to protect against flooding and wave overtopping, design decks with relief slots and drain holes, valves, or wave walls, raise critical assets, or raise access to roads and storage facilities. This might also include, as I mentioned, doing things like more green infrastructure. It could include restoring wetlands near ports, which can help provide protection against flooding. It could mean putting in actual gardens, green rooftops, parks within ports to improve water flow and reduce flooding during rain events, and also helping dissipate heat and providing shade. Lots and lots of different options. Some of them hard infrastructure options, some of them behavioral change options, and then some of them softer environmental infrastructure options. Next slide, please. And then to incorporate climate resilience in the ports, you want to start designing activities, operations, and maintenance related to coastal or bank erosion, which is going to be an issue in many port areas. Design activities, operations, and maintenance related to heat waves, which again, for the most part, we expect to be hitting most port areas. And then in some cases, design activities, operations, and maintenance related to sedimentation or reduced river flows. Again, I'll highlight this one because I know it's quite a big issue here in the Mekong region and beyond. A lot of the cities that you're calling in from have been built on floodplains, and so this is a major issue. So what are some of the potential actions? Well, it could be removing redundant structures that promote deposits of sediment or debris, educating local communities about consequences of trash disposal around watercourses. It could include massive operations to potentially dredge canals or dredge rivers or dredge areas that already are filled up with trash, prevent debris from washing into navigable areas using many different tools such as water nets, and there are various mechanized water tools that can help clear out debris and sedimentation, and introduce diversions, one-way systems, or temporary closures of ports or waterways. Anyway, again, this is for reading more on your own time, but this gives you an idea of a lot of the things that will need to be done in every port globally, particularly in the Southeast Asia region, to start preparing them for increasing impacts of climate change. Next slide, please. Another case study is the Port of Melbourne in Australia. So the Port of Melbourne secured a huge 475 million Australian dollar 6-year sustainable loan in 2023. The loan launched with a syndicate of 10 banks and included the following KPIs. So they are committed to doing Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions reductions by 2030. Scope 1 and Scope 2, if you're not familiar, they're technical terms sort of in the climate world. Scope 1 emissions refer to emissions that are generated on site. So those would be emissions generated at the port. So for example, if there were gas or diesel burning vehicles that were driving around the port, that were on the port all the time, that would be Scope 1 emissions. If there was a power plant or power generation right at the port that was powering the port, that would be Scope 1 emissions. Scope 2 emissions are those emissions that are generated because of the port or whatever infrastructure it is, operations off of the site. So in that case, Scope 2, as would mostly be the case for most ports, electricity is going to be generated somewhere off-site. So all the emissions from the electricity generated off-site would include Scope 2 emissions. Scope 1 emissions would also include emissions from concrete and other sources right within the site. Scope 3 is the final term when we're talking about emissions, and Scope 3 refers to the much broader emissions, which are they're considered to be the most complex, but they're also ones that have the biggest impact on the emissions of a site or of a project, and they're whole of life cycle emissions. So what this means for a port is that emissions could be caused, Scope 3 emissions could be caused by the production of shipping fuel at another facility, or if it's biofuel, it would include the emissions caused by the growth and the harvesting of whatever plant was being used to make biofuels in a different country. It would include the transport of that fuel. It could include the emissions caused by the manufacture and use of the products being shipped. It's very complex and very large, and so it is quite hard for any project, whether we're talking about ports or literally anything. It is hard to account for scope 3 emissions, but it is also important to try. So as part of the Port of Melbourne, they are targeting to engage with shipping lines, tenants, and other port users to identify opportunities to progress the decarbonization of the port supply chain. So this could include things like reducing the weight of packaging, reducing the amount of packaging, extending the life of products, focusing more on reducing single-use products, changing consumer behavior. It could be potentially very large. Next slide. And these are just some highlights from the fiscal year 24 sustainability reports to show some of the impacts that the Port of Melbourne is having and some of the things they are doing. So, for example, you can see that I'll focus on what the planet is here on the planet box on the top right. So their net zero target for 2030 is ambitious and it is great. So that's 5 more years to have net zero emissions under scope 1 and scope 2. They are doing a 43% reduction in emissions as compared to fiscal year 2023. In terms of scope 3, they are actively engaging with, as I said, other people in the supply chain with an attempt to reduce emissions and engage about 62% of their actors thus far. And then they've also committed to funding a shellfish reef pilot project to the tune of $890,000.89 million. They are also looking at how they're engaging their employees, what kinds of partnerships they're having with the local community, and how they are increasing jobs and prosperity for the local community and the country. So the point of this being improving the resilience, the climate resilience of ports does pay off in multiple ways in terms of overall net savings because less need to respond and rebuild after disasters, to beneficial impacts on the community, the planet, and the people that are engaged with the port, which have often difficult to measure, but real financial impacts as well. And I think that's it for me, and my voice is about to give out, so I will go off now.
Thank you very much, Jenna and Trishna for your presentation. So we're going to move now on why we're doing this. So you have seen first that we have sort of in the initial presentation mix disaster resilience, which is basically to address disaster risk like an earthquake. Then we have looked at climate resilience to address climate risk like typhoon, like flood, like extreme heat. And this built the climate resilience of the port infrastructure, but also build the climate resilience of the communities. And lastly, decarbonization is basically part of climate mitigation and are all the action that can help to reduce the carbon footprint, the greenhouse gas emission of port infrastructure and associated facility, including shipping line. So in this context, we are basically seeing that maritime decarbonization contribute to climate change mitigation directly because decarbonizing means reducing the carbon footprint, reducing or avoiding greenhouse gas emission, and that contribute to the Paris Agreement on climate change that was approved by 190 other countries in 2015, and that basically contribute to manage the global temperature to less than 2 degrees Celsius. And by saying less than 2 degrees Celsius, we are targeting 1.5, but all the climate modeling is now done on a scenario where we are going to miss out this target of 1.5. We're going to miss out this target of 2 degrees. We're basically doing climate modeling with global temperature rising to 2.7 degrees by 2100. That's the trend. Unless something drastic happens, we are basically not going to meet the objective of the Paris Agreement. We also, as you have seen in a previous slide, how decarbonizing port increase business opportunity and global competitiveness. And this is very important also in light of the latest regulation by the International Maritime Organization that will heavily penalize from 2027 port and shipping line that basically doesn't substantially reduce greenhouse gas emission. And we could have a separate presentation just on this. This is a rule that was proposed in March this year, and that should be, I would say, endorsed by all the IMO member countries in October this year, and will have a profound impact on maritime decarbonization, because shipping line that doesn't want to be penalized are going to retrofit the ship engine, and the port facility that are not equipped with this new generation of fuel through green bunkering will basically be bypassed. And that means that the shipping line will prefer and target port that have those facility in place in order to refuel with low carbon fuel. And last but not least, as presented through the Jet Sea lens and the Just Transition lens, we have to improve the well-being of communities and also improve the environment quality. And we will go through this process during the presentation later. We will talk about biodiversity, how those projects of maritime decarbonization also improve climate resilience, and the use of nature-based solution in order to improve environment quality, but also sustain biodiversity conservation. So what we're doing is basically the left side is a little bit of a summary of what I have said before: environment quality, competitiveness, social well-being, and the objectives set by the government of your country. Benefit in terms of environment is all, port decarbonization is all about reducing the carbon footprint. We talk also about green port. Is the port in your country categorized, classified green port? What are the actions that has been doing to reduce or avoid greenhouse gas emission, as well as other pollutants, in order to improve air and water quality and reduce the environmental impact of the port infrastructure? There is some economic aspect. You have, in terms of operation and maintenance, saving if you promote efficiency, waste reduction, apply circular economy principle, improve the end of life, extend the end of life of your product. Most of the countries in ASEAN are starting to incorporate in their legislation what we call extended producer responsibility, which means that anybody that produces something is responsible for its disposal, and therefore promote recycling of the product in order to extend the end of life. P4I has done a few studies in Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand on maritime decarbonization, where we basically highlight all those aspects. If you can off your microphone when you speak, thank you very much. Then we look at financing from investor and financial institution. And as you have seen in the sustainability linked loan, or if a bank or a government wants to issue sustainability-linked bond to finance maritime decarbonization, there is some target and performance. And there was a question in the chat. Basically, those target performance are discussed and agree with the lender. But since we are focusing on maritime decarbonization, if we are issuing a financing instrument like a performance bond, a sustainability-linked loan for maritime decarbonization, most of the target and performance target will be linked to maritime decarbonization. But there is opportunity. Mental health is linked to JETSI, and as we see, social well-being is also a critical component of maritime decarbonization, and is therefore a very good indicator of performance of the impact of the maritime decarbonization. What we want is basically enhance the livability of the port cities that live next door. We don't want this to be a source of problem for the cities and communities that live next to the port. You have seen in the example of the Port of Melbourne that the communities are contributing to the port in terms of money. So this is, of course, Australia is a developed country, but basically we need the community on board in order to do this type of project. And the best way is basically by decreasing pollution, improving the environment. I just came back from France last month, and my wife, who is from Thailand, was very impressed to see that all the port we see are basically the water is transparent and you can see fish, which is not the case in most of the place, unfortunately, in Southeast Asia at the moment. So a lot of things to do in order to decrease pollution and get the community on board. At the country level, under the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, each country has pledged some climate target. This is reflected in the nationally determined contribution that each country has. And last year, at the last COP, the Community of Parties, all the countries have pledged to update their nationally determined contribution. So this is being done. And the trend is basically that the carbon intensity is reduced by 45% by 2030 in order to control this global temperature and for country to reach a net zero carbon neutral position by 2050. Some countries have already announced that they will not make it by 2050. They will make it by 2055, by 2060, and that's okay. What is important is there is a plan and the country are monitoring the improvement. And basically, and since transportation is a major contributor of greenhouse gas emission, and maritime decarbonization is part of the transport sector, everything we do in terms of maritime decarbonization is good for the country and is good for the planet. I'm not going to go in detail through the risk. You know, I think they come at the environmental level, economic, affective competitiveness, social, reputational damage, which is a very important damage that is very hard to recover. And at the country level, there will be more and more regulatory pressure. And again, I remind you of the IMO latest regulation to curb carbon intensity for the shipping line, and that will have a huge impact on green bunkering, availability of biofuel and low carbon fuel for the ship. I'm sure shipping line will basically reroute ship if a port is not equipped to deliver those low carbon fuel. So we're looking at different things. Jenna explained to you scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. I'm not going to repeat, but basically under emission reduction mechanism, you are basically working on scope 1, and that's basically you are doing everything you can in order to reduce your carbon footprint. This is under the direct responsibility of the port, things you can do, and that will basically end up with the port being labeled a green port. There is a scope 2 is basically adopting renewable energy rather than take energy from the national grid, which might be a mix of coal, gas, even oil, petrol. So if the port can basically finance its own renewable energy infrastructure, they will basically reduce the scope 2 emission. Emission reporting governance, it's very important to have third-party independent verification. It's like when you do an audit, you basically need to show that you have in-house dedicated accounting team, and those numbers are audited by a reputable company in order for your port operation to gain in credibility. And then you have the enabler for decarbonization, because ports are, of course, a hub and gateway for transportation. And as I mentioned before, if you provide green fuel bunkering, you will be competitive, and shipping line will basically say, okay, I'm routing my ship through this port because I have green fuel that is going to be available. I spend a lot of money retrofitting my ship. I need basically to have this green fuel availability. So in those maritime decarbonization P4I did for Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand, we have basically provided a roadmap and detailed report that I'm sure will be made available to the ASEAN Secretariat and at least to the ASEAN Maritime Working Group. So this is basically across the project cycle. The first phase is basically planning and programming. Then you go through design with a conceptual design, a detailed design, feasibility study in order to get cost estimate. This design is approved. Then the facility gets constructed and supervised. There is a commissioning to start, and then there is the operation and maintenance. So what we want is to be more efficient in order to be able to have a 20% edge in carbon reduction potential, be clever, be a little bit smarter on how we design and use low carbon material. When I was at the Green Climate Fund, we started working on how to account for the manufacturing of concrete and steel in terms of greenhouse gas emission, because manufacturing concrete and manufacturing steel are very energy intensive. That means very generate a lot of greenhouse gas emission. So that's part of what we call greening the supply chain, and having basically in place green procurement procedure. If it's not available in your country, you can look at other countries that use green procurement, but basically everything you can do to promote nature-based solution and low carbon material, minimize transportation, use of local material that are available in order to minimize resource consumption and contribute to the circular economy of your country. Build less, that means maximize the use of your existing asset and operate and maintain better to extend the end of life of your asset. If you can delay construction of new infrastructure by a couple of years, that has a huge impact on the financial performance of your port. So any infrastructure project that can be delayed through better operation and maintenance, little bit of rehabilitation, will have a huge impact on the financial performance of the port operation. And then the build nothing is basically we're looking at having alternative approach. So basically, yes, if you do nothing, you don't generate greenhouse gas emission. But this is a little bit of what we say that this is basically challenging the root cause of the requirement for maritime decarbonization. So this is a table that lists the potential strategy, what we can do in terms of port vehicle and transport, cleaner feed vehicle, in terms of cargo, how do we control the emission, in terms of port infrastructure, anything you can do in order to improve the efficiency of the terminal. Also waste reduction and recycling, and then power generation. We talk in terms of scope 2 emission. If you can have cleaner electricity as part of the national grid, that's great. If not, start to invest into your own infrastructure, if renewable energy infrastructure, if your government authorized. There is some country where the port has to rely on the national grid, is not authorized to have their own. And then cleaner fuel. Of course, this is all about green bunkering. So I'm going to ask your contribution. If you can go back to your QR code with your phone or your tablet, or you can use the website that is mentioned on top of the slide with the use code, and basically go through the slide. And I'm going to ask my colleague Anita to display the result. Thank you.
Everybody, just a quick question to have a look at what are some of the climate risks and hazards that we've discussed today. So please do type in your answers and they'll come. Again, sea level rise is coming up a couple of times. Coastal inundation, coastal flooding, similarly. Sedimentation, heat wave and sea level rise. Storm surges. Great. So we seem to be all on the same page there, which is fantastic. I'm going to sneak to the next slide. And that's just to reflect a little bit on some of the key incentives that we've been discussing today regarding decarbonisation of ports. Give you a minute to think through some of what you've heard and found useful. Let me know if you're having trouble with the Mentimeter. Green technology, definitely a key component of the decarbonisation journey. Easy financing. Smiling quietly to myself about that. Perhaps easier financing. Okay, so all of the words are coming up in kind of equal measure. So fantastic. So a clearer regulatory and policy landscape, easier financing and financial investment pathways, linked to carbon pricing, of course, and competitiveness, and subsidies, importantly. But technology, a big one, the link to shore power. Okay, So thanks very much, everybody. I'm going to hand it back now to Hubert, but it's fantastic to see some of the conversation reflected.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, no right or wrong answer on this one, but basically it's just to give you opportunity to stop and to think a little bit about what we have done. I'm glad that in the climate risk, nobody put earthquake because this is of course a disaster risk, but you fully understand sea level rise, coastal protection, that are basically heat wave, extreme heat wave, that are the three major climate risk affecting port operation. And then there is, of course, flooding. Also, interestingly, there is drought, because if water security is affected in the port area, that's no good for the community if they feel that the port is stealing their water allocation. So that's why I always remember people, please involve and include the community in your discussion. So we have about 15 minutes to go through the last 10 slides. We're going to make it, but basically this is a diagram you can reflect in your time, basically saying, okay, this is basically to show the multidisciplinary and multi-sector nature of maritime decarbonization. Whatever decision you take, you are not alone. There is a lot of stakeholders in this. So, like I say, we have about 15 minutes. I will try to finish in 10 minutes so that we can have questions before we go for the lunch break. So, this is about designing PPP for climate resilient port infrastructure. And I see that I apologize for about I think if I remember well, 20% are close to be expert in PPP, but I'm going to address the audience that don't know much about PPP so that we are all on the same page. So what is the role of PPP in climate resilience, but I will say also in maritime decarbonization, not only climate resilience, that is looking at climate adaptation, but what can we do in terms of maritime decarbonization? So this is the traditional PPP diagram where there is basically public sector involvement and public sector risk. So PPP is basically a long-term contract between a public entity, government agency, and a private company. So, and this is basically to provide what we call public good, a public asset or service to people or to a private company. And the private party has some risk, but also the public sector has some risk. And a good PPP project, a good PPP contract will allocate the risk to the private sector and to the public sector in a fair manner. The guiding principle is the entity that is best positioned to manage a risk should be responsible for this risk. If you transfer all the risk to the private sector will take on those risks, but they will price the risk, and your PPP contract will shoot up. It will become very expensive because you have allocated all the risks. So all the PPP negotiation and discussion are basically about risk allocation. So you do this at the planning stage, you do this during the feasibility study, the market study, and then the private sector, when you go for bidding, we will look at tender and a contract award later on, will know what risk they need to price in their bid. And as I mentioned, if they will price the risk, whatever. So the more risk you put on the private sector, the more expensive your project will be. And importantly, the remuneration is linked to performance. So as we have seen in a sustainability-linked loan that public or a PPP entity or a private entity can take, the remuneration in a PPP contract is linked to key performance indicator that has to be defined as part of the contract. So this is, again, to show you a slide to show you the importance of communities, and each PPP contract should have a social license. So privatization, as I mentioned, does not eliminate all the public sector risk. Some of those risks are transferred, but they still exist. And that's why the private sector is pricing those risks. So as we don't want to increase the overall cost to the user or to the state, basically it's important to very well manage those risks. And a PPP contract that's not very successful is most of the time because of unfair or improper risk allocation. And social license is part of the social risk management strategy, because local communities, the city next to the port is very important in order to sustain the operation of the port. This is where people are going to live. This is where the children of the people working at the port are going to school. So it's very important that the port has a good name in order for this social risk to be addressed in the public-private partnership infrastructure. Now, I'm going to go back one step for the people who don't know much about PPP. We can be very pro-public sector and say public sector is as good as the private sector. The main problem, the main question all the countries have is basically to say that there is not enough public money around. If you can turn off your microphone, whoever is speaking, thank you. There is just not enough public money available to finance all the infrastructure requirement of a country. That means if a country wants to develop its infrastructure, it will need to engage with private sector to finance and also commercial bank, because there is not enough public money around. So any country that wants to meet its GDP target will need to find a way to include private sector financing. And private sector financing, they are coming not to lose money, but to make money. So you have to make contract that basically allow a reasonable profit for the private sector to participate. I used to tell to counterpart government agency, it doesn't matter what me as an ADB project officer and you as a government agency want. What is important is what the private sector is willing to do, because if they are not willing to finance, basically we have lost our time. So important to do market sounding, roadshow, in order to understand what the private sector wants in order to invest its money. Now, it's all about value for money, efficiency of the process. If we have private sector mobilization, we need to incorporate cost management. And because private sector wants to maximize profit, they will be very good at cost management. They will be very good at life cycle management, extend as much as possible the life of an equipment. So for example, if a crane motor lasts for 5 years, they will extend it to 8 years or 10 years by doing proper operation and maintenance, preventive maintenance of the facility. I'm not saying the public sector doesn't do it, is that there is a very strong incentive for the private sector to go beyond what is normally required in order to maximize profit. Reliability and effectiveness. 1 day of lost operation, as we will see in one example, cost a lot of money. So it's important to have something reliable. I make a parallel with the water sector. If you advertise in an industrial estate that the water is cheap, the industry will not set up because water is cheap. They will set up a factory in your industrial estate if the water is reliable, because 1 day loss of production because there is no water is much more expensive than the cost of the water. And is the same with PPP. In port operation, what you want is a reliable service and effective service. You cannot have a ship coming to port and say, sorry, you'll have to anchor offshore and wait 2-3 days because we need to fix out our terminal. Not professional, not very good. Innovation being brought, especially at the moment, we talk a lot about digital innovation. Private sector can get people that have been trained with those skills in a much easier manner than the public sector, risk management and use of the asset. So those are the potential benefit of having a PPP, and PPP bring the best of the private sector and the best of the public sector. Now, those are potential action. We're going to go through those in each of the slides. We will have a session on project identification, one session on project appraisal and how to structure after lunch, tender and contract award and contract management. So let's go quickly. We have a couple of slides on project identification. So project identification is part of the planning programming exercise. At the country level, there might be a socioeconomic development plan. In climate change, there is a nationally determined contribution to target principally projects that will reduce or avoid greenhouse gas emission, and supplemented by a national adaptation plan that will look at climate action that can boost climate resilience in the country. And depending on your country, they may be target for the transport sector and target specific climate action for the maritime sector. But if they are not, it doesn't mean that you don't have to do anything, because you are still contributing through decarbonization to the greenhouse gas emission of your country. So we basically identify project, we call also project origination, and that's basically the first stage. In your planning and programming, you say, okay, we want to decarbonize. Okay, what sort of project do we need to do? And we gave you in previous slide some indication. So you have the national level and you have the port operation level. In a PPP contract, this is driven by the public partner. But you may have sometime a private company that come and say, hey, we noticed that, for example, most of your crane are diesel operated. We're basically willing to invest with you in order to change this to using renewable energy. And we can partner to do that. So this is called unsolicited proposal. You may accept it, you may not accept it. Most ASEAN countries now have PPP legislation coming, and you have basically to respect the legislation of your country. So project identification, as I say, a public function, but the private sector can be proactive and propose to the public sector some project of interest. And the public sector can decide, yes, this is a good idea. We're going to do it with this company. Yes, this is a good idea. We're going to go for bidding. under a private contract or a PPP contract, or no, this is not a good idea, we're not going to do anything about that, or we will do it in 2-3 years because we want we have other priority. So the screening of those projects, the long list of projects that come up need to be costed. We need to know how much it costs, and they need to be prioritized. What you cannot have is basically a dream master plan that costs something that the port or the country cannot afford, and you need to set up priorities. So last slide for this morning, that's basically a detailed aspect on how you can do this high-level climate and disaster risk screening. You work in terms of probability. For example, are your port area subject to earthquake? Is your port area subject to typhoon or not? That will basically give you the type of project you need to identify in order to mitigate this climate or disaster risk. I'm going to stop here. We are like 1 minute to lunch and ask if there is any question. I'm checking the chat. Or somebody say it doesn't see the slide moving. I'm at slide 41. Okay, I will arrange to have with Anita that we send you the slide during lunchtime if there is a problem with the viewing of the slide. I'm going to let you go for lunch. If you have any question, put them in the chat. I will answer them with Jenna and Trishna when you come back from lunch in 1 hour. Thank you very much, and we'll see you after lunch.